Welcome to Trust Talk. In this episode, we step into the real world of trust with Charles Feltman, author of The Thin Book of Trust. Rather than theory, Charles takes us into the everyday moments where trust is won or lost, in feedback that lands wrong, in vague requests that create frustration, or in conversations clouded by anxiety. He offers a simple but powerful framework. Trust rests on 4 domains: care, sincerity, reliability, and competence. Miss one, and the whole relationship can wobble. Yet, as he reminds us, it's often care, knowing someone has your back, that matters most. We talk about how slowing down in fast-paced workplaces can prevent vague commitments and broken promises, and how making clear, specific requests is one of the simplest ways to strengthen trust. Charles also shows how disagreements, when approached with trust, can move teams from break down to break through. This conversation is about small choices, the kind we all face daily, that decide whether trust grows or erodes. Your host, Severin DeWitt.
Charles, welcome and thank you for joining me today. This month marks a special milestone for Trust Talk, our 5th anniversary, and it's had me reflecting on the many remarkable conversations I've had about trust. Your work has been part of that bigger picture for decades. Back in 1992, you founded Insight Coaching, and since then you helped a great number of individuals, teams and organizations strengthen leadership, communication, and at the heart of it all, trust. I'm really looking forward to diving into your insights today.
I am really pleased to be on your, is it 50th, did you say 50th?
No, the 5th. So we have now
5 years.
We started in 2020 and we are now in our 5th year.
5th year, yes.
Yeah,
yes, that's wonderful. I'm really amazed that you've been able to keep going and have a great podcast for so long. It's remarkable, and I'm pleased to be part of it in this year.
Thank you. So words like vulnerability, competence, risk, integrity, and benevolence, they come up in the interviews quite often. These seem to be how people try to make sense of trust in relationships, in workplaces, and in institutions. When you hear those words, how do they land with you? Do they fit with how you think about trust?
All of them do, yes, in different ways, I would say. I want to start with vulnerability because when we trust someone, we are in fact being vulnerable in some way, making ourselves vulnerable. In fact, that's how I define trust is choosing to make something you value, something important to you, vulnerable to another person's actions. So vulnerability is kind of at the heart of trust. If we are unwilling to be vulnerable, we're also saying I'm unwilling to trust people, or at least trust them in a deep way. So vulnerability is certainly part of trust. Competence is one of the areas of trust that we'll talk about probably in a few minutes, but it's one of the domains of trust that I find to be important in our assessments of other people's trustworthiness and their assessments of ours. And of course, if risk is part of it, because if I'm going to make something vulnerable to someone else's actions, that's taking a risk. That's me taking a risk. And so how do I assess whether that risk is going to pan out or not is a big part of making that choice to be vulnerable. Integrity and benevolence, again, like competence, are areas of assessment around trust and trustworthiness. So they're definitely part of the trust equation, if you will.
You wrote a book, The Thin Book of Trust, where you offer a different framework: care, sincerity, reliability, and competence. Why those 4? Do terms like integrity or vulnerability fall under those, or are they doing something different?
Integrity does. It falls under the trust domain or assessment domain of sincerity. So there's these 4 different domains, and each one of them encompasses certain different behaviors that either build or can damage trust. So There's sincerity is one of them, which in some ways includes both integrity and honesty. So sincerity is in part walking my talk. If I say I'm going to do something in the sense of, I say that something is important to me, something is a value of mine, or something is the way I want it to be, I'm going to act in ways that support that. And then honesty is simply I have the same conversation going on in my head as the one I'm having with you externally. Not a different conversation in my head, in other words.
Right.
So that's the domain, the assessment domain of sincerity. And let's go back to risk, because I'm assessing the risk of trusting someone, right? So I can assess in each of these four domains. The domain of sincerity, I can make assessments about whether this person has integrity and is honest. The domain of care is like benevolence. It is, in fact, benevolence. That's the research people, the folks who do academic research into trust, whether they're economists or psychologists or sociologists or neuroscientists, talk about benevolence. I just renamed it care because it's easier to kind of talk to a CEO of a company about care than about benevolence. But it's the same thing, which is that I assess that you have my interests in mind, as well as your own, of course, when we interact, when you make decisions and take action related to me. You care about me. So that's that domain of care. Then there's reliability, which is that you keep the specific commitments that you make or promises that you make to do something. And then finally, competence, which you mentioned before. Competence is basically the assessment that you have the skills, capacity, knowledge, understanding, experience to do either what I'm asking you to do or that you're proposing to do.
I'd like to move on from theory to practice. In your experience, when trust breaks down, say during feedback or disagreement, which of those four tends to fail first?
Well, I think actually one of the reasons why I talk about these four different domains and help people understand them is any one of those four can fail. And once it does, we as human beings have a tendency to say, okay, I can't trust this person. Let's say it's I'm giving you some feedback about your performance in a situation. And you hear my feedback and you don't think it's justified. So immediately you're kind of wanting to defend yourself against unjustified feedback. And what's failing there is that we haven't set a standard or talked about a standard for what your performance is supposed to be, what I'm expecting. So you begin to, distrust me, and I've already begun to distrust you because you're not living up to my standard of competence, even though you may not have known what it is. But the next thing that happens with most human beings or many human beings is I start then assuming you're not trustworthy at all. Because you're not trustworthy in this situation, you're not trustworthy at all. So suddenly all four of those domains fail. But I will say this, that probably the domain of trust that's most important is care. If I trust that you intend good for me, that you have my back, that you have my interests, my best interests in mind, I'm going to feel safe with you in ways that I wouldn't otherwise. And so I may even give you a bit of a pass on untrustworthy, I've got air quotes here going on, untrustworthy behavior in any of the other three domains.
You said that disagreements shouldn't be about proving who's right, but about building trust. What have you seen happen when someone actually makes that shift from trying to win the argument to focusing on keeping the relationship strong? Can you share an example with us where that change really made a difference?
Yes, and first I'd like to say that I may have said something that I don't necessarily completely agree with. Building trust is certainly something that can happen when we have a disagreement and work through it. But I think disagreements, the real value in having a disagreement is we have two different perspectives on something. And working through having those two different perspectives gets us to a better outcome, a better product, a better solution, a better answer than if just one of us decides. So I think that's really the value in disagreement. But disagreement used in that way is challenging when we don't trust each other. So having a foundation of trust in which to disagree, that the sort of the container of trust in which to disagree and really work through that disagreement is what's important. So we can have a disagreement and we can also maintain the trust and relationship at the same time. And it helps if we come into that disagreement with some history of trust already there that we can build on. If we don't, it's still possible for human beings to do that. So an example of that might be, so I worked with a client a couple of years ago anyway, and he was having just sort of an ongoing series of disagreements that was never resolved with one of his colleagues. So it wasn't like they were having a disagreement and then coming to some sort of resolution. It was just every time anything was going on, they would disagree about it. It was some aspect of it they would disagree about. And it was really frustrating for not only both of them, but their manager and the entire team that they were part of. So at some point, I was working with one of them. I asked permission to sit down with both of them, and they both agreed. And we used the trust framework to try and understand where trust might be damaged. And essentially what came up was that they both had very different styles of communicating and interacting with people, of operating in general. But the thing was that both of them thought the other person's style was just not even legitimate. And so they were not giving that other person legitimacy as a human being in any situation. So we worked with that for a while until they finally kind of got it, if you will. They agreed that, yeah, okay, they could see the other person's style as a different style, not something that was bad or wrong or faulty or defective with that other person. Simply a different style. So once they'd kind of crossed that bridge together, they were able to, and they had to practice a bit, and literally they set up some parameters for practicing and how they were going to have conversations with each other. But as they did that and practiced, they were able to have disagreements where they actually found a solution that worked for both of them. So that's an example of, I guess, of that.
You've seen a lot of frustration in teams around vague or unclear requests. What's one thing people often leave out, and what's a simple way to make a request clearer without over-explaining?
Yes, and I'm kind of laughing because have recently been exposed. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Erin Meyer and culture, and sort of her culture map. One of the things that she talks about is how different cultures deal with explaining and how much information one gives. So in U.S. culture, which is what they call she calls a low context culture, Netherlands, low context culture. In such cultures, we assume that the other person doesn't really know much to start with. There's not much context already there, so we have to provide it. So we explain a lot. So, of course, I'm used to working primarily with U.S. clients. And what I find in those situations is that a couple things keep coming up over and over again. One is people leave a time frame off where they don't they're not clear about when they want something done by, and then they don't, but they have something in their head. They just don't specify it. And so the other person doesn't meet that time frame, and then that begins to cause a problem. Other aspects of clarity also are, how do you want it to look? What does done actually look like, or maybe sound like? So clear enough that the other person knows what I'm looking for, and enough to know that they can deliver that or not.
Yeah, and if someone thinks they were clear but the result misses the mark, what's the best way to respond? Push harder or revisit how they asked?
Revisit how they ask, or actually have that conversation. So if I ask you to do something and I'm not very clear with my request, I don't give you the right information that allows you to go off and do it to my specifications the first time. So you come back with something that isn't what I'm looking for. At that point, it's the best thing to do is have a conversation about, well, let's be more specific and clear about what it is I was looking for. And you can help me define that. You can help me work through and give you the information by sort of feeding back to me what you're hearing, and is this what you're looking for, or is it like this? I can also at that moment take a harder look at my own my own way of explaining things. I often work with clients who are impatient, and impatience, of course, drives us to jump forward and not give the important pieces of the detail. So I give an explanation about what I want, but I kind of give it mostly in my head and don't actually explicitly put it out there.
You have said that a lot of people, especially when things are busy or stressful, like you just mentioned, think, I shouldn't have explained this again. What do you say to someone stuck in that mindset?
Yeah. So do you want to be right about that, or do you want to move forward? Do you want to get what you need to get to move the task or process or whatever forward? I shouldn't have to say that. Yeah, well, maybe not. And yet the other person is not understanding what it is you're asking for. If it's a chronic problem, there may be other things you need to address. But if it's something that happens once or twice, yeah, take a look at your how you're explaining, how you're talking about what you want. And you may have to actually give some more information for the other person to be able to. They're not mind readers. We aren't capable of reading each other's minds very well most of the time. So yeah, it may be that you do, in fact, have to say that. And you may have to go over that again with a little more detail.
In your book, you mentioned that the push to move fast at work often leads to vague commitments and broken trust. What's a realistic way to slow down just enough to build trust without falling behind?
It's a cultural issue in many companies that we've got to go fast, we got to keep up, we got to keep moving forward. And so I make a request of you, for example, where I just give you the bare minimum of what I want. Can you do this? Thanks, bye. And you don't have a chance to even say to me, hey, wait a minute, I can't do that. I've got 10 other things on my plate. I can't get it to you by the time that you want it. Or I don't even have the capacity to do that. I don't know what it is you're asking for. Can we talk about this a little bit? I'm already gone.
Right.
I'm on to the next thing. So slowing down enough to actually have real conversation with each other and checking in. Severin, can you do this? Let me just Is this something that you can actually do? Do you have the time? What about all the other, 5 things that I asked you to do in the last 2 days? Are you gonna be able to realistically get all of those things and this done? Do you have the resources? So I'm part of checking back to make sure that you can actually fulfill the promise um, that I'm asking you to make. So and that's just, by the way, in the domain of reliability. We also tend to sometimes, we tend to make promises that we can't keep because, well, we're supposed to just be able to do it all. And time pressure. We got to do it all. We got to get it done. And of course we can't. So things fall to the wayside and trust begins to erode. But there are similar things happen in the domain of, for example, competence, right? I can get a request to do something, and I may suspect I don't know how to do that, or even know for sure I don't know how to do that. But rather than say, "Well, wait, stop, I don't know how to do that, I need some help," I just go, "Sure, I can do it." And then I figure I can learn by doing, and it takes me way longer than if I had just asked for a little help.
I just picked up a word you mentioned, a word that I wasn't familiar with, mind reader. Is that the one person in the team who picks up things without much explanation, who seems to get it, who always delivers, even when instructions are vague? I remember that you wrote that you should warn against relying too heavily on that one person. Why is that?
A number of reasons. The obvious one is relying too heavily on that one person. That person's going to burn out. They're going to, at some point, they're just going to burn out, and you'll lose them. You'll lose all of that capacity that they bring to everything that they do. And of course, that also means that other people are not getting the opportunity to do things as well, to contribute, to learn, to grow. Ideally, what you want to do is help the other people grow professionally and be able to be a little more like this one person who seems to be able to, figure it all out and get it done without you even asking. Not that you should have that expectation for everyone, because probably 80% of the people will never get there. They're still perfectly capable of contributing well to the team. They're just not going to contribute at the level of that person. But taking everything away and giving it to that one person is not going to help them get any better. And it's going to overload and burn out the one person you're relying on all the time.
A last subject, Charles, I'd like to touch with you upon is trust and anxiety. In emotionally charged moments, anxiety tends to take over. How does anxiety affect the way we judge someone's sincerity or care?
I'm just going to make a joke about me being a little bit anxious right now. It's like, oh God, I don't know if necessarily know the answer right off the top of my head. So anxiety, of course, comes in the sort of brainstem, amygdala, what I call the distrust network that operates in our brains and nervous systems and produces anxiety, produces fear, produces distrust. That it's pretty much the same brain structures, the same neurotransmitters and hormones that are involved in all the way to fight, flight, or flee. Actually, fight, flight, or freeze. The same ones that sort of move us to distrust, to become suspicious of someone else. So if we're already anxious, so there's already some priming of those circuits, for other reasons perhaps, and we're looking at someone and trying to assess if we can trust them, we're probably going to tend to fall towards the distrust side of that question. Now, what I talk about is trusting wisely, which means actually stopping for a moment and going, wait, let me run this by the other part of the other network, the trust network, which is slower, takes more capacity because we're actually going to be a little more logical about it and think about it carefully. But doing that allows us to ask the question, am I reacting out of fear or anxiety, or is there something here about I really should distrust this person, whether it's in the domain of care, sincerity, reliability, competence? Is the anxiety speaking here, or is there really something that I should distrust?
You've worked with people who have turned high anxiety situations into trust-building moments. Do you have an example where someone turned a breakdown into a breakthrough?
Yeah. I was working with a team once, and one of the people on that team was really challenging my everything about what I was doing and saying. Basically, he was wanting to kind of discredit me, and he was trying to do so in a way that would get the rest of the team to also distrust me. He kept challenging things that I would say, things, information that I was providing, and so on. And I had someone else on the team at a break come up to me and say, this guy does this with everything and everybody. And anything new, he challenges, he distrusts, he pushes, and he tries to get the rest of us to kind of go with him and distrust whatever that new thing or person or idea is. So I said, well, how do you all deal with that as a team? What do you generally do when that person is doing that? And he said, well, we just generally ignore him. And I thought, yeah, but he's trying to get something across there. What is it? And what is it that he's doing or trying to do with this? And so I said, well, can we just actually, do you think we would talk about that? And so the next moment that happened after the break, I just stopped and I said, so what's going on here? I'm hearing you're challenging yet another, actually in this case, I think it was some piece of data. It was like a scientific paper that talked about trust and certain aspect of trust. And I said, what's going on? And there was silence for a few minutes. And then one of the team members said, well, so-and-so is doing what he often does. And then we moved into a conversation about what happens on the team, what happens for the team when he does that, and and he was, kudos to him. He was able to speak up and say, well, say what was going on for him, which is that it was a safety issue for him. And this is how he would feel safe, is by being the challenger. And it's okay, great. You're the challenger on the team. You're the person who challenges new ideas and tests them out and then tries to get the rest of the team to do that as well. And the rest of the team kind of thought about that and went, oh, that's a really interesting idea. And then we moved from there into roles on the team that different people might have. And what's your role and what's your role? And it became a really powerful discussion and conversation.
You've spent a big part of your career helping people understand and build trust. You've given us some really practical ways to look at it, and more importantly, to use it, even when it's uncomfortable. That's not always easy, but it really matters. Thank you very much for today's talk and for being our guest today. And I wish you all wisdom and good luck with your further practice as a trust consultant, if I may call you that.
Thank you, Severin. Yeah, I guess I am sometimes a trust consultant. I use it mostly in my just general coaching, leadership coaching practice, because all my clients somewhere along the line bring up a trust issue or another.
Yeah, probably a coach sounds a bit more trustworthy than a consultant, isn't it? Sometimes.
Yes. Anyway, thank you very much. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trust Talk. We hope today's conversation inspired new insights into the transformative power of trust. At Trust Talk, we're committed to exploring trust's role in shaping a better world, one story at a time. If our mission resonates with you, we invite you to support us. Your donation, no matter the size, helps us continue these meaningful conversations. Visit us at trusttalk.co/donate to contribute and be part of this journey. Thank you for listening and being part of the Trust Talk community. We can't wait to have you join us again for the next episode.